Welcome to this week's episode of Rabbi Pinchas Winston's live webinar, A Vision Thing. You can go and visit his website at 36 .org. That's spelled out 36.org. And over there, you'll be able to see all of his books, many books that he's written, as well as different shiurim and projects, webinars that he's involved with. I highly recommend you go over there to visit there. Also, we have another site called Bring Them Home, and a video series, an inspirational video series on YouTube, which is called youtube.com/Israel Torah. There you can find not only the live webinars of Rabbi Winston, but you can also find many other shiurim related to Aliyah and the Jews returning home to Israel. Without further ado, Rabbi Winston.
Thank you. This week's Torah reading is instructive for a lot of reasons, a lot of ideas, a lot of insights, a lot of very important to focus on. Of course, the climax, in a sense, comes towards the end when Avraham is asked to bring up the son that he has been waiting for literally decades to have. And he has him miraculously, Isaac, right? And he's 37 years of age at this time, Isaac, and Avram is already 100 years of age, and God says, bring him up as a sacrifice. And of course, we know how it ends because here we are today, and we're his progeny after thousands of years, and it ended very peacefully, nicely, but it wasn't a major test, a major accomplishment on behalf of Avraham that he was prepared to go that far. And we'll talk a bit more about that towards the end of the discussion with Hashem. But there's a very important theme that can easily be missed, but it's so important in general in everyday life, but especially today, especially with current events and all that's happening around the world, and what might happen in the future, because ultimately everything comes down to what we call perception. Years ago, already almost 2 decades ago, I began reading my weekly Parsha sheet. That's a 3 or 4 page discussion to do with like we're doing today, a theme on the weekly Torah reading, and I had to come up with a name to try to encapsulate what I was trying to accomplish, and I chose the word perceptions, because that's what it was all about. It's all about perceptions, and we discussed before in the past that perceptions are based upon assumptions, what you think about life, what your own personal database is, what you've been fed, what you picked up on your own over the years. And this becomes our outlook, our way of perceiving the world. And how we perceive the world, of course, determines the decisions that we make and how we make those decisions, if we make them at all. And life is about decisions. It's all about the decisions you make, about the good ones, the bad ones, the ones we don't make, we should have, the ones we do, we shouldn't have. But it's all about decisions in the end. And every important thing in life comes down to a decision. And that decision comes down to perception. And it's something that we take for granted, but we are told in this week's Torah reading that should not be the case. I mean, it should be obvious in some respects, but as obvious as it is in by discussing it, the reality is that people just take it for granted from day-to-day basis. They just sort of go with it. What I see must be the reality, right? If it's not what's real, then how can I see it? And the answer is because we can be delusional. We can misread things. We can misinterpret and misunderstand things. Constantly, we're finding out that what we thought we saw was not that thing itself, and or we just missed it completely. And it has a lot to do with basically what goes on in this week's parsha. So there's probably about 20 some odd references to seeing. The name of the parsha itself, the parsha is Vayera, which means that God appeared to him, but from the word lerah, to see. Appearance and seeing, they're all connected to the same idea. And Avraham had the guests, which were the angels, and that was also a function of seeing. And perhaps one very example of how perception can be adjusted or can be influenced comes towards the middle of the parsha, after Avraham is told by God, after his wife first insists that Yishmael, the father of the Arab nations, is sent away from the house, sent away from home, someplace else, because he was dangerous. He was trying to kill Yitzchak. He was very dangerous to Yitzchak. So therefore, she suggested very strongly, in no uncertain terms, that he had to go. And God, he didn't want to do it because it was very hard. He was his son. Maybe it wasn't Sarah's son, but it was Abraham's son through Hagar. And it was difficult for him. So God had to step in and say, no, what she said you should do, you have to do. And he did it. And they go out, and the water runs out, and Yishmael becomes sick, and he's on the verge of death. And then an angel shows up and speaks to his mother, Hagar, who was a distance away because she didn't want to see him die and suffer. She sat far away as opposed to comforting him, like most mothers would do, but that's what she did. And eventually the angel showed up and said, don't worry, God has heard the voice of the boy crying out. He sees the situation. He's going to have Rahmanis and save. And then it says that she was able to see. She was able to see the well. At first, she couldn't see any well. Now, what was the well there, or was camouflaged? What happened? The angel came along and said, oh, just pull this back and you can see the well. Or it was miraculous. It wasn't there before, and now it was there. And you see that God opened her eyes. And once he opened her eyes, she saw something she couldn't see before. So this actually became a skula, this concept, this idea that until God opens a person's eyes, they really can't see something. And there's a little card you can buy with the verse from this week's parsha about God opening the person's eyes, her eyes, and really our eyes. And as a result of that, people have been using this statement, this idea, for the longest time. They've been using it as a school. A school is something you do that try to facilitate some positive result. It translates as charm, like a charm, but it's not really that. It's actually an action or a thought or an idea, if it's real, that we do because somehow in doing this, it connects us to a spiritual idea or reality on a different level. So for example, Rosh Hashanah, we have skulas, right? We dip the apple in the honey, and we make a special statement about the fact that the year should be sweet, and we have beets and different vegetables because the Hebrew name of these vegetables sounds like a positive thing that we want to do, cutting off our enemies, being successful in business. One of the joking ones is to use celery and raisin, a raisin and celery, right? And you say, may it be your will, God, to give me a raisin salary, right? Your pronunciation should increase. But we have some very serious ones. They have little pamphlets inside. And somehow by saying this and focusing on this, it changes the reality in a real way. And the school, it became to find lost objects that before you go looking for, you can't find something, your car keys, some money. I'll tell you a story in a second that is remarkable. But and you say this, and you give a little tzedakah as well, right? And you go looking. And so many times, amazingly, that it actually works this way. And I had a difficult time personally believing this type of a thing. I get a little stubborn when it comes to this. And I will look. No, I'm not going to pay the money. I'm not going to say the school, I'm going to go looking for this thing. I'm going to try and find it without any assistance whatsoever. And a lot of times I couldn't find it. No, begrudgingly, I give the tzedakah, and begrudgingly, I made this statement. And sure enough, within seconds, just the other night, it happened to me. I was actually changing a light outside our house downstairs. So one of to the entrance of our house is a light there. And I dropped a little screw. It was a silly thing to do because the way I took out the light, I should have known the screw was going to fall. Little teensy screw, and it fell to the ground. There's three of them, and I could have done without the third one, but it was safer to use the third one because it could maybe fall out at some point in time, or rain can get in and blow the fuse. So I went. There were leaves because now it's the fall, and the gardener hasn't been here for a couple weeks already. And so there are leaves all over the ground and dirt mixed together with it. And literally, as I was bending over it with my phone as a flashlight, looking for this little teensy screw, it literally felt like looking for a needle in a haystack. So I didn't waste any time this time. This time I gave the tzedakah. This time I said the statement that everything, a person's blind to everything until God opens their eyes and shows them something. Within seconds, I found the screw. I wasn't surprised because I have many stories like this idea about, how people lose things. And one of the classic stories happened a long time ago to us. And it's worth telling the story because it ties back in anyhow to the main point. And people like stories. And my father and mother were visiting us for Pesach. And, as it is by Pesach time, a lot of times you have one room where you put a lot of things into it because they're not kosher to Pesach. And you have to seal it off for the week. And we had that one room We put all this stuff, and it was literally hard to walk into this room. And we closed it off. It was Erev Pesach. It wasn't yet Pesach yet that moment, but it was Erev Pesach. And my father was here, and he lost a bag that he had with his money. And they had been to Kotel, and he thought that he might have left it behind there, but there was a good chance you're not going to get it back, because someone's going to pick it up, not the right person necessarily. You don't know. It can be, and a lot of times people do return things, but there was a lot of money inside they were here for a couple of weeks, and they were American Express traveler's checks. And in order to cancel them, my father had to give the numbers of the stubs. And of course, you never put them together, so he didn't. He kept them separate, but he could not remember where he left them. And we looked all over the house. I remember sitting outside in front, having lunch, talking about it, worried about the whole situation because it's a lot of money, and they need to cancel the traveler's checks so they get new traveler's checks. And he checked all over the place, and he just could not find the second wallet he had where he had kept the stubs. And we told him about this idea, the school of making the statement, looking for lost object. And it's not really his thing. It wasn't, but he was getting desperate. So we said, what do you have to lose? So he did it. He made the statement. He read the little card that we had, and he gave the little tzedakah. And then, we didn't go looking for it that moment in time, but we just thought about where to look and hoped that somehow would show up. Within minutes, maybe 15 minutes of making this statement, for some reason, I had to go into that room where all the stuff that was not kosher at Pesach was being stored. And it was a mess, literally a balagan. It was chaotic in that room to clean it up after Pesach. But in the meantime, you're just so happy to seal it off and not see it. And now you don't need to go in there. And as I was looking for something behind a wall and there's my father's wallet stuck underneath something. Like literally, it wasn't easy to see either the way it was. But because of the angle I was on, my eye happened to catch it. And I saw the wallet. Sure enough, that was the one in which they had the receipts for the traveler's checks, and they were able to cancel it, which made my father feel a lot better going into Pesach. And he was amazed because it was within minutes of making the statement that this happened. And then not too long after that, thank God, a very honest person called us up because there was somewhere they tracked us down. I don't exactly remember how they tracked us down, but they tracked us down and returned my father's money pouch thing with everything inside of it intact. And became friends with the person as a result of this. But this is the reality. Things could be right in front of your face, and you can't see. There are times where I looked at something. I was like literally looking at it, and it was like invisible to me. I couldn't see it. We made the statement. We said this thing, reminded ourselves that God's the one who shows us the truth. You have to be a truth seeker, and then God will show you the truth, and then you find it. And there's countless stories like this. We joke around, over here that the Rabbi Binyamin, the one who made the statement and reminds us of this thing, we always said his name, that somehow he's in cahoots with somebody or something, hiding this stuff so that we'll give the money to tzedakah, and then he shows us where it is after. That's just a joke. It's a reality. That's what it says in this week's parsha. It says that a person's blind until God opens their eyes. We think that we can see everything with our eyes. Maybe you might need glasses, maybe contact lenses as time goes on. But if I can see, I can see. And whatever I can see, that's got to be reality. And if I can't see it, then it's not reality. Even science is based a large part on this idea. They won't believe in God because they can't prove the existence of God in a laboratory experiment, that they can physically do something and record it and say, observation method, the whole thing. And because of that, they can't see God. And yet so many other people can. Is somebody delusional? Is somebody, kidding themselves? Or is it possible that two people can look at the exact same reality and see two different things? And based upon their assumptions, for sure that's the case. We just had an election, just 2 days ago. And you have the country divided into two parts, and each one vehemently believes that they're in the right. One country with one destiny, supposedly, but two very different opinions. People get married and then they get divorced. They start off in agreement. Everything seems to work, but then as time goes on, some there's differences and difference of approaches, and and no longer are they team for one another, compatible, and unfortunately, it ends the relationship. And business partnerships is all over the time, but it's all based upon perception. In the middle of all of this discussion about vision and seeing in this week's parsha, that first of all makes Avraham very unique in the world because nobody else seems to share that vision until he shares it with them. The Talmud tells us that people would go wandering through the desert, looking for a place to stay, or a place to be refreshed. And Avraham purposely set up a tent with openings on four sides, which doesn't make for a very clean tent because the sand blows in all over the place, and it's the desert. But people would come by, and he would feed them and take care of them. And then they would want to bless him and thank him for all the hospitality. And he'd say, bless me. Why don't you bless the one who made the entire world and made all this food and gave us all this blessing? Bless him. And the world, one by one or two by two, gradually would learn that there was something else besides what they thought was responsible for creation and making the world run, and they would learn about God. And Avraham made converts, and Sarah made converts. They brought people over. How did they do it? They changed people's assumptions about life, and that changed their perceptions. And once their perceptions changed, so then they were able to see what Avraham saw too, and they went with it. So Avram's traveling around, and once again, he's forced to go someplace. The first time, last week's parsha, he goes down to Egypt because there's a famine. He goes down to Egypt, and the whole story with Sarah, his wife, where she says that they both agreed to say that she's Avraham's sister, which is not exactly changing the truth because there is a certain level of reality to that. Pharaoh doesn't really ask why Avraham lies. He knows the truth. He knows why Avraham would do a thing like that, to save his life. And perhaps to prosper at the same time, as Avraham says, I'll do well because of you, if we go along with this. Now, Avraham knew that Pharaoh could not touch her and that she'd be safe, but it was to save himself because the people in Egypt, apparently, they didn't mind murdering somebody, but they didn't like adultery. How does it work out? Well, people have strange perceptions, strange approaches to life. So Avram said that if they find that I'm your husband, they're going to want to, kill me to avoid adultery. They won't mind killing me, but they won't want to do, because the people of the flood were washed away for things like that. So they had these rules. So Avram lied, and Pharaoh knew exactly why. But when he goes to Gerar, he goes to what is today the Gaza Strip, or Gaza, right? And he's down there with Avimelech and their people. And once again, he doesn't ask Sarah's permission this time. He simply tells her, because she's not. The last time we did this, I didn't like what happened. So Avram says, well, we're doing it anyhow. And they do it. And he says that she's his sister. And of course, Avimelech does the exact same thing that Pharaoh did. He takes Sarah, and in the middle of the night, then God comes to visit Avimelech in a dream, in a prophecy, in a dream, not because Avimelech merited prophecy, but because of Avraham and Sarah, he had this prophecy, and God tells him that she's a married woman, and if you touch her, you'll be touching a married woman, and that's terrible. And Avimelech, I didn't know. He told me that she was his sister. And clearly, I'm a righteous person in a righteous nation, and I would never even dream of taking someone else's wife like this. It was purely in innocence. I mean, how can you take anybody anyhow without their permission, without their willingness? Sarah never agreed to any of this, and he took her anyhow, right? But he calls himself righteous, and God says, well, I know you didn't know. The righteousness part, forget about it. You're not righteous, and you're not so pure, whatever. But I do know that you had no idea that she was, in fact, his wife, and you can give her back, and he'll trust that you didn't touch her because he knows the truth, and he's a prophet anyhow, and he'll pray for you, and because he'll pray for you, that you'll be able to be cured from your illness once again, and everything will be fine. The next morning, Avimelech gives back Sarah as promised, and as advised, and he goes to Avraham, and he says to Avraham, tell me, I want to know, What is it that you saw when you came here that made you feel that you had to lie like that to us? Okay, I know she's your sister, kind of, because of the way the family works out. You can kind of call her your sister, but not, but all that stuff aside. But the bottom line is, it certainly was a white lie. It certainly was, a deception. Why did you feel that you needed to deceive us and put us in a situation of mortal danger by telling us that she's your sister? What? And Abraham comes back and he says an incredible statement that, again, if you don't think about it, you don't pay attention to it, Rashi does. The main commentator on the Torah, certainly does. And he pointed exactly, quoting the Talmud, the Medrash, but pointed exactly what Abraham meant. And he says that I saw that there was only not fear of God here. Yira Shemaim. The word Yira, of course, is fear. It comes from the word, very similar word to the word Lirot, which means to see. So fear and seeing, of course, are tied together, because you can't fear something you can't see, meaning that if you're not aware of something, there could be a burglar in the house, but if you don't know that, you can't see him, meaning you can't hear him, you're not aware of him, you maybe should be afraid of him, but how could you be afraid of something you don't know exists? So there's a connection. You have to first be aware of something. You have to first see it, either in your mind's eye or your physical eyes, in order to be able to, before you can have fear of something. And he says to Avimelech, he says, just fear of God was missing here. So what's the just? His rock. The Hebrew word is rak, right? It means only, just. Why did they add the word rak? So Rashi explains, he was telling Avimelech, listen, you got a beautiful place here. You nicely developed. Condominiums, shopping malls, everything, you name it, government offices, people driving cars, parking spots, underground parking. You've got everything here in terms of materialism. It's a very developed place to be living in. There's only one thing that's really missing, but it's everything. And that is fear of God. There's no fear of God here. That doesn't mean there's no fear of God here. But what do you mean by that? How did he know? So Rashi says, the first thing they asked him when he showed up in town, they came and they asked him, "Is that your wife? Is that your wife? Right? Are you really? Are you married to each other? Right? That's the first thing they asked." So Avram says, he said, "You come to a foreign town. What's normal? What's the right thing to do? You ask, is she your wife, or do you say, do you have a place to stay? Are you taken care of? You need some food, want a drink, want some shelter? That's what you do. That's called hospitality. That's hachnasas orchim, right? Being nice to wayfarers and taking care of their needs, right? What is a mitzvah in the Torah called Eglarufa. The Eglarufa is, let's say someone is leaving a town and somehow just outside the town, they're found dead. We don't know how they were killed. We don't know if it was people from the town, outside the town, marauders, who knows? We don't know. The cause of death, or at least the person who brought it about, we don't know what happened. So there's a whole procedure where they have to bring a calf that was never worked to symbolize this potential that was never used to a place that doesn't grow. It's in Parshas Shoftim, in Devarim, in Deuteronomy. You can look up the halachas there. But the people who do it, the leaders, the Sanhedrin, the great leaders of that time, have to say, as they wash their hands in this river, that our hands did not spill this blood. And Rashi again comments and says, "What? There's a suspicion that the Torah leaders would, God forbid, kill somebody like that, just an innocent person. It's hard of killing a guilty person. Of course not. So then, what does it mean? It means we didn't see to this wayfarer's needs enough. We didn't accompany him outside the city to a point where, as far as we can possibly go, to make sure he was safe and taken care of. We didn't do that. So in a sense, we're culpable for what happened to him. And this is the procedure to try to deal with that reality. So Hachnasas Orchim is about taking care of people's needs, not about finding about the relationship, whether I can take this woman or not. And Avram said that was the sign. The very fact that people thought only in terms of themselves. They were selfish. Their perspective was on how they could benefit only, how they could be. What's in it for me? If you happen to benefit too, fine. But main thing is, what do I get out of this situation? What's important to me? The big picture? The long-term picture? Not even thinking about that. I just want to know how I'm going to enhance my life materially right now, on the spot. And when I saw that, Avram says, there's no Yir Shemayim. There's no fear of God. Now, later on, after Abraham is finally told by God to bring Yitzchak up as a sacrifice, and he's about to do it, and he holds the knife up in the air, and he's about to bring it down and carry through with the command. And the Medrash says that Yitzchak died anyhow, because when he saw the knife, he was so prepared to go, so prepared to sacrifice himself to God, that his soul actually left him, and he temporarily died, until the angel Gabriel collected his soul and put it back into his body. And he came back to life once again and went off to yeshiva, and then eventually got married to Rivka. But after God finally says, don't do it, and instead he sacrifices the ram, from which we get the shofar. We blow every Rosh Hashanah to remind God that our ancestor was prepared to do that, so forgive us for our sins. And this happens, and Avram says, he names the place. And he says, this is the place where God will be seen. And eventually it's going to be the Temple Mount. Eventually it's going to be the place of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, both temples, and the third temple, God willing, which hopefully we'll see in our lifetime very soon. We're all waiting for it. And it's going to be a place where God's going to be seen. Now, is he simply saying that this is the future place of the temple? Or is he saying that this episode that I've gone through is going to somehow create an awareness, an awakening that's going to allow people to see God? One of the most fantastic stories I've ever seen. I love this story, and it makes this point very, very clearly, and that is that Elisha the prophet, who was a disciple of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, he had everyone had their own, helper. Gehazi was Elisha's helper for a time being, for a period of time. And the king of, which was it again? Ram, I believe it was. I'm not exactly that time. The kingdom of the Jewish people was divided in two parts already. It was after King David. It was after Shlomo HaMelech. It was already after. It was the time of Rechavam and Yeravim. The kingdom divided. There was the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah to the south, and the king of Aram, I believe it was, wanted to attack a trap. To lay a what do you call it? What do you call that? When you surprise attack somebody, it's a special word for that. But he
an ambush.
Ambush. That's the word. Thank you very much. That was my voice from heaven, close to it. And he laid that trap, and no one told the king of Israel except Elisha, because he was a prophet. And because he was a prophet, he knew what was going on. So he warned the king of Israel, who was able to, sidestep it to go around it, and the ambush, of course, failed. So the king of Aram says to his people, okay, who spilled the beans? Somebody had to have, some spy amongst us must have told the king of Israel, because how else could he possibly know what I plan to do and save the king of Israel? Who's on the payroll of the Israeli government? So his right hand man, his people tell him, nobody. Everybody here would never do a thing like that. So how did he know? Because Elisha the prophet told him. He knows what goes on in the world. God tells him, and then he told the king of Israel, and that's what said to everybody. So this king says, that's it. Let's go after this Elisha guy, and let's get rid of him. So they actually track him down to some small town, and they surround the place. And the next morning, Gehazi goes out in the morning, and he looks up in the hills, and he sees a massive army all over the place, right? A massive army. And he's totally in a panic. And he comes back and tells his master and says, Master, take a look, there's a whole army surrounding us. We're going to be, crushed. And he says, nah, nothing to worry about. Our army is bigger. Come again? He's like, what? Our army is bigger. He says, we have an army? Of course we have an army. And it's way more massive and way more dangerous. He says, am I missing something? So at that point in time, Elisha, who knew that he could not see what he saw, prayed to God to open the eyes of the lad, that he should be able to see what he sees. And of course, a miracle happens, and his eyes open, and he sees angels on horses, or not real horses, angelic horses, whatever they are. But there's an army of angels out there ready to take care of the army of Aram and save Elisha and Gehazi. And he's total mind-blowing reality to take a look and to see all of this. It was there the entire time. It was there the entire time, but he couldn't see it until God opened his eyes and he was able to see it. In this week's parsha, at the end also, the most important part comes to light. And that is when Avram takes up Yitzchak as the sacrifice, God tells him to travel north towards the land of Moriah, to the place I will show you when you get there. And that's how you'll know where to bring Yitzchak up as a sacrifice. And Avram travels with Yitzchak and Eliezer, his trusted Syrian, came from Syria, Damascus, a servant, and Yishmael, his son from Hagar. And the four of them go up together towards the north to the place that God will show. And when they travel 3 days, all of a sudden, Abraham realizes he must have arrived. How does he know? Because he looks up and he has his vision over the Har Moriah, again, the place of the Beis HaMikdash and the temple. And that's the place. He sees the divine presence hovering over this mountain. And he realizes this is the place that God is showing me. But he's not sure who's supposed to go with him. So he turns to Yitzchak and he says, Yitzchak, my son, what do you see when you look at the mountain over you? He goes, wow, amazing. I see the Shekhinah, the divine presence hovering over the mountain. Wow, I cannot believe I can see that. He says, good. You're obviously meant to come with me. And he says to Eliezer, and he says to Yishmael, what do you guys see? And they say, well, we see a mountain and some trees and, a lot of rocks and blue skies behind that. I don't know, anything particular you want us to see? And he says, no, what you see is what you see. And then he says, you stay here, Po, that's here, Ima Chamor, with the donkey, while we go Ko, we go over there, the word Ko can mean there, bow down to God and we'll come back to you after. Simple statement. You stay here with the donkey while we go over there, bow down to God. Now, why you leave us behind? That's what God told us to do. Just be patient. They took out their deck of cards and played some cards. In the meantime, had something to eat until Avram came back without Yitzchak, but Yitzchak went to Yeshiva after that. And that's the end of the story. Except for one thing, is that Avraham sees something that they can't see. And what's amazing, because we know that every Hebrew letter represents a number. And therefore, a word is a collection of Hebrew letters. You can add the numbers up and get a sum total, right? For example, the word Adam is an Aleph Dalet Mem, which is 1 plus 4 plus 4, 40, which is 45 altogether. And the reason why that's so interesting, aside from the fact that, it's a number, is because then you can make connections between ideas that are not necessarily connected on the surface, but below the surface, they certainly are. So, for example, the word emes, right, can be reduced, is an aleph and a mem and a tav, right? And that equals 441, but you can add the 4 plus 1 is 9 altogether. And the word Adam can be 40 is 45, 4 plus 5 equals 9. And you have to be a truthful person to be a full Adam. But even better, the Gematria of the word Geula, which means redemption, is also 45. So there's a connection between the word Adam and Geula, meaning that a person who becomes a full-fledged Adam, and I think we spoke about this in the past, about the soul, the body, and how they work together, is a person who's going to be redeemed, can live in redemption, even if the rest of the world is still in exile. So Gematria is an important thing. So how does Gematria, which is Kabbalah, mysticism, how does it play out in this story? So it turns out that the word Po, you stay here with the Chamor, is the Gematria of 85. You add 1 for the word that's called Gematria Kolel, and it equals 86. Do the same thing with the word Ko. The word Ko is Chof and Hey. 20 plus 5 is 25. 1 for the word, a form of Gematria called Gematria Kolel, equals 26. So in each case, you're doing the exact same thing. You're adding up the letters, adding 1 for the word itself, and you're getting a sum total, 86 and 26. Why is it so important? Because it turns out that the Gematria of the name Elohim, with the Hey as opposed to the Kuf, is also 86. And that's the God, that's the level of God's reality that works through nature. Even the word Hateva which means the nature has the same gematria as the word Elohim. And the word ko with the 126 happens to equal another name of God, which is the tetragrammaton name, the four-letter name. We don't pronounce the way it's written. We call it Havaya because it's the same letters, just mixed around. And that's the name of God who works on a supernatural level. So in one statement, you have an allusion to two realities of God. One which is hidden and looks and gives the impression that nature exists, that there's a natural order to creation, but it's really God, but he's working in a consistent way to give the impression there's nature. And there's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, this very holy name that we don't even pronounce the way it's written today because it's so holy, but it alludes to God working supernaturally above nature. So really what Avraham is saying to Eliezer and Yishmael is that since you can't see that vision, we're looking at the exact same thing. We're looking in the exact same direction. Not like I have special glasses on that let me see things you can't see. I have a special mind's eye. It's different than your mind's eye. There are things I know about life. There are assumptions that I live by that affect my perception that permit me to be able to see something that's actually invisible to other people. And the same way this donkey can't see that vision, it's just a function of nature, it's living nature, it's a natural animal. It doesn't see more than what its eyes show it. Likewise, that's how you stay here with the donkey in the end. But we're going to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, to the Shem Havai. We're going to the vision of God, it's supernatural in the end. And this is what was missing in what is the modern day Gaza Strip today, which is the place of the Philistines going back ancient time. This is what was missing. Avram said that the vision here is just everyday, normal, down to earth vision where the reality of God is not real to people. You might have idols in your temples. You might serve whatever you think is a concept of God, but the reality is that no one's connected, and therefore everyone does what they want. What's even worse is that people delude themselves into thinking that they know the truth, and it's not. It's their truth. It's their subjective reality, and they can rationalize and justify. So, today, we talk about false news and talk about all the line, as the Talmud points out, one of the signs the Mashiach is imminent is the amount of falsehood that exists in the world. But I've come to learn over the years that there's two levels of falsehood. Maybe there's more, but there's two main levels of falsehood. One of them is when you know the truth, you know the objective truth, you've been taught and you believe in it. Not that you say, well, it belongs to somebody else. It was just nurture as opposed to nature. But like, you believe this. I hold to this truth. I know it's wrong to steal. I read a story about somebody who was an accountant for a company, and all the money had to go through him, at least on paper. And he ran short. He's an honest man. He's known for his honesty, but unfortunately, it happens in life. He couldn't pay his bills. 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever, he's falling deeper in debt. He decided to borrow money, literally. And he said, and I believe it, he just wanted to borrow the money. The plan was to pay it back next paycheck. And it didn't work out that way. Instead, he fell short again, and he borrowed some more money. Anyhow, to make a long story short, he kept borrowing money. And of course, the more you borrow, the more you can't pay back, until finally he was $250,000 in debt. Of course, the company caught him, and he had to go to jail. But he said he was so grateful to be caught. Now, that may be hard to comprehend. If a person's already a hardened criminal, hardened thief, they're always looking to get away with it. But this person, he was basically not. He knew the truth, and he knew he was lying, and it bothered him. So therefore, when he was hoping to get caught at some point, because he couldn't stop. He couldn't help himself. It was like an addiction. And so finally, he got caught, and he said he was grateful that he got caught, because now it finally stopped. He knew the truth. When a person knows the truth when they're lying, they know they're lying. You can work with that. You can feel guilty enough to admit the truth. How many people have come back to apologize or to turn themselves into the police because they could not live with the fact they did something that was terrible and dishonest and wrong, etc., etc. That conscience is based upon the fact, I believe this is true, but I had a weak moment or many weak moments and I failed, and now I'm going to make amends. But there's another level of falsehood, and it's way worse, far more dangerous. And that is when people actually tell a lie, they bend the truth, but they're convinced it's the truth. Either convinced themselves or they're just deluded into believing that this, in fact, is the truth. You can't work with that. You can't change people's minds, and you find it. You try and point out things to people and say, but this, but this, but this. No, not true. And they ignore it. And they rationalize. And they just can't change their opinion because changing the opinion just means too much of a change for themselves, and therefore they just delude themselves. And they go with the wrong thing because they can't admit what the truth actually is. They're living in the lie. It's part of the reality. And the Talmud says that's one of the signs the Mashiach is imminent. And this is what Avram said. It's a place where anything goes. It's a place where people can justify and rationalize doing the wrong thing. And I can't work with that. And that's what made me lie to protect myself in the end. Because now that God spoke to you and it came out, so now we got what to talk about, because it's kind of hard to ignore that when God comes to you and threatens you with death. So now that he spoke to you, we can talk about it too, and even make a pact. But until that time, no way. You wouldn't have heard me. You would have done whatever you wanted to do, because that's what people do when they lose their moral compass. That's what people do when they're out of touch with objective truth. That's what people do when they're not real with God. So like when someone says to me, so-and-so said this, or that person said that, or that person says the opposite, and this, it goes, I just basically ask two questions, before making a decision about whether to believe what I'm being told or not. Did the person telling you this information, they believe in God? They believe in an objective truth? That's number one. Because if they don't, forget it. You can say anything you want and not feel bad about it, and justify and rationalize, etc., etc. And even if they believe in God, do they believe that lying is something that they're going to be held accountable for, that they're going to be, have to deal with it, pay for it at some point in time? If not, then what compels a person to tell the truth? Come on. Everybody, even the most honest person, gets tested at some point in time. We have moments of weakness, as King Solomon said. There's no righteous person in the land that doesn't sin at some point in time, because we're human. And some people are more human than others, so to speak. And because of that, they're constantly, falling prey to their evil inclination. And when our entire society becomes that way, like what happened to Stone in this week's Parsha as well, they literally become the incarnation of this philosophy. It's embedded in the way they think. Why did Stone get destroyed and other places not? Nineveh is told, through Jonah the prophet, if they don't repent, then God's going to destroy the place. Why they get warned? And then they save the day by doing tshuva on whatever superficial level they do it. Why is Stone destroyed? Because it became the ideology. It became the philosophy. And God said, I can't work with that. There's nothing to work with over there. And therefore it's going to have to go down. We have to be careful. We have to take a look at our societies, the ones that we live in, and we have to ask ourselves, are we like the people of Gerar? Are we like the people of Stone? Are we going in that direction? Are we deluding ourselves? Am I being honest? How do I know I'm being honest? Am I lying about the fact that I'm being honest? Or am I being honest about the fact that I'm lying? Where is it? What? It's a very important thing to do on a personal level, in a family, in a society, because if we don't, we lose our way, and sometimes we never get back. Anyhow, thank you once again for coming, and Shabbat Shalom. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
Thank you very much for another very inspiring webinar. I want to remind everyone not to forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Israel Torah. And don't forget to click on the bell to receive future notifications. This is being sponsored by bringthemhome.org.al, as well as in co-sponsoring Israel 365. We appreciate everybody coming and listening. We try to do this on a weekly basis, so come back next week, and we look forward to more wisdom from Rabbi Winston.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom.